So let's move on to the last portion of this module where we sort of talk about putting all of these pieces together. So we're going to learn more about how to combine all these components of DBI to make better decisions overall about student intervention. So now you're going to practice creating a graph and looking at a case study, some example data, and then setting a goal for a particular student using that data. So you're going to need Excel for this task. So I want you to go ahead and take a moment. You can open Excel because in a minute I'm going to have some data for you to graph. We'll also have an example with a voiceover to help you sort of through that process. There are also going to be some questions about the case study, and you should write the answers to those questions in your workbook, okay? So go ahead and take a minute. You're going to open up Excel. If you have a different graphing program that you like to use typically, like on Drive, or maybe there's a graphing program you use that's part of your progress monitoring program, that's great, and like you can continue to use that. But just for today, we're going to practice using Excel. It's a great tool for you to have for any kind of data that you need to graph. So we're just going to quickly go through how to graph that data. Okay, so now you've got Excel open, and let's learn a little bit about our student. The student's name is Celeste. She's in 4th grade. She's identified as having a learning disability in reading, and you decide to use DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency. You give her 3 forms, that's the baseline data, in the fall, and her words correct per minute were 50, 55, and 53. Her average percentage per minute accuracy across all 3 probes was 89. You decide to continue progress monitoring her using DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency once a week, and you use the enhanced core reading instruction as her intervention. You need to make a decision after 8 data points or 8 weeks of data. Her words correct per minute and percent words correct per minute for each week are on the next slide. Okay, so here we have Celeste, you have her baseline data, and you're progress monitoring her using DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency once a week. Our goal is to get 8 weeks of data. So here's Celeste's data, okay, and this is the data that you're going to use to enter into your graph. You have her 8 weeks of data. You have her words correct per minute. You have her percent words correct per minute. That's her accuracy, okay? So you're going to have to keep going back and referring to this data table in your slides as we go forward. So in Excel, in the first tab, that should be the page that you currently have open, you're going to actually create a graph for Celeste. You're going to use the benchmarks that can be found here in this PDF to set a long-term goal for Celeste. You need a goal line that starts at her baseline, and you need a vertical line indicating intervention 1 with a description of the intervention. Do you remember the intervention she was using? You might have to look back at that case study to remind yourself of that intervention that was put into place for Celeste. Also, you should have her 8 weeks of both the words correct per minute and the percent words correct per minute data graphed, and you should put in a trend line for the words correct per minute only. We're not going to put a trend line in for that accuracy. So you've got these 5 pieces that need to be put in place for this graph data in Excel. But now we're going to take you through, my colleague Alex did a voiceover, and you're going to learn more about how to set up your Excel sheet and how to get these pieces in place for Celeste. And then we'll come back and talk about some of these questions we'd like you to answer in your workbook.
So the first thing is to set up your spreadsheet like this. Here at the bottom, tab 1 is your graph. Tab 2 is questions. Obviously, question 1, answer. Question 2, answer. You go through and just answer them that way. Back to the graph. First, have your week, percentage words read correctly per minute, your baseline goal, intervention 1, and go ahead and put intervention 2 in there as well. Let's go with your name. Let's say John for the student, grade, 2nd grade. Measure, you're going to do ORF, 2nd grade, so this is what we're reading fluency, 2nd grade. Your baseline, let's say his baseline was 32, and his goal is going to be, let's do 80. So in weeks, you would do weekly data points. So 9/1, 9/8, 9/15. You should start sometime in late August or September, and then go all the way through sometime in May for end of the year here. So his goal was 80, and his baseline was 32. So there's his baseline and there's his goal in the same column. Oops, actually, I should put that here rather than here. Fixed. Okay, so words, percentage words correctly, that's just accuracy, and you would keep this recorded across all interventions. So let's say intervention 1, you decide to use Wilson's. There it is right there, intervention 1, Wilson's. So you would start collecting data in intervention after the baseline here. Say the student gets 35, 38, 45, 48, 50, he's doing really well, 52, has a bad couple of days here, then he goes right back up. How many data points is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's take that one out. I'm going to change that one just to kind of give you an idea of what it might look like. Okay, so you have your 8 data points. You need to make a decision. In order to make a decision, you have to graph it. So highlight all of these up to the baseline. Go up to charts, scatter, marked. You'll get a chart that looks something like this. The first thing you need to do is make it big enough so that you can make some decisions. These red dots here represent your baseline or goal. So you need to add a goal line, add trend line. Okay. Well, obviously you want to make that a little bigger and make it the same color as the data points. So let's do red, and there's your goal line. Now, this is intervention 1. You want to add your trend line. Again, you want to make it similar. It's green, but I would also recommend that you make it dashed so that you can tell that that is a trend line and this is a goal line. Now, let's just assume for a second that this trend line was actually below the goal line, and this one data point down here was pulling it down, and you want to see what happens if you take this data point out. Well, one way you could do that is to simply put your cursor over it. It says 1020, so go to 1020 here, remove that, and then that's what happens to your trend line. Of course, if you're keeping data for decision-making purposes, you want to see what happens when you remove that data point, but you always want to put that data point back in at the end of the day. So this is what I want to see in the graph, but I also want to see change lines. So you could go to symbol, shape rather, line. This is your baseline, so I want to see baseline vertical line here. And then this is where you're making your decision here in intervention 1. There. You click on these boxes. Baseline. You can make this as fancy or as standard as you want. I just want to see that you have labeled them and that you know how to label them when you're showing these graphs to teachers. or to parents, or even to students. Sometimes it can also be helpful to label your goal line. Just it that way. So that there's no question about exactly where your goal line is. So your final graph should look something like this, but you'll also have your percentage words read correctly in there somewhere. So let's just say 90. I'm going to drag this all the way down to say the student did a really good job, did 90% the whole time. Again, you don't have to draw the trend line with these data. I just want to see them there so that you can kind of see the accuracy the student is having while they are completing these CBMs. So again, your goal line labeled, your data in intervention 1 with a trend line, baseline marked with a vertical line, intervention 1 marked with a vertical line. All of your data is here. You should also have a description of intervention 1 here. The questions should be answered here. Line 1 is obviously question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4. That's it. Good luck. Hope to see your graph soon.
So now you've graphed your data, you have a Celeste graph set up. Now I want you to think about the answers to the following questions and write your answers in your workbook. You can talk a little bit with a partner, you can talk to a small group. So I want you to think about, number 1, what was Celeste's baseline? Okay, you had some of that information, you entered that in your graph. 2, is Celeste at risk for reading? So how would you determine that? What can you compare to make that decision? Write your goal for Celeste, so it should match your goal line in the graph and be written as, by the date, Celeste will read at least a number of words correctly per minute on 3 consecutive trials as measured by 4th grade DORF, DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency, okay? So use that, the exact wording as it's phrased here. And then, according to the NCII, that's National Center on Intensive Intervention, tools for academic intervention, is enhanced core reading instruction a good intervention to start with? Why or why not? So you're going to go to that tools chart on the National Center for Intensive Intervention, that's intensiveintervention.org, go to the intervention tools chart, and you're going to examine whether that's a good intervention to start with. Finally, look at Celeste's weekly data. That was in that table that you saw. Should you keep or change the intervention? So what should your decision make? What should your decision be? Think back to level, trend, variability. What should your decision be? Should you keep or change intervention? Why or why not? Okay, so think back to those decisions and ways to look at that data. Go ahead and think through those questions. You'll need to take a bit of time to respond to these questions in your workbook. This is just another graphing resource that might be helpful to you. This is a really nice graphing spreadsheet that was created and posted on the National Center for Intensive Intervention site. This might be another option for you. It's an Excel sheet as well, but it's set up in a nice way. So just an additional place that you can go to get another resource for graphing.